Wyoming Territory, summer of 1877. The wind carried dust and judgment in equal measure when Penelope Rawlins stepped off the westbound wagon, with a swollen belly and no ring on her finger. She gripped her small travel bag and held her chin high, though the stares from the townsfolk of Sweetwater Ridge burned hotter than the sun overhead. Her boots crunched on gravel as she walked past the general store, where women whispered behind gloved hands and a wiry man spat tobacco near her feet. She was supposed to be a bride, one woman hissed. Left at the altar, I heard. Carrying his child. Penelope did not correct them. What good would it do? The truth was worse. The man she had been promised to meet out west had taken one look at her belly when she'd stepped off the train in Cheyenne and disappeared before she could speak his name. He had paid her fare, sent sweet letters, promised a life. Then vanished like smoke. She had made it this far alone. She would not beg. But Sweetwater Ridge was not Cheyenne. It was smaller, meaner, less forgiving. By evening, she had been turned away from every inn, every boarding house. We do not have room for burdens, one landlady said, eyes flicking to her stomach. Penelope spent the night on the back stoop of the mercantile, curled around her belly, her dress torn at the hem, feet blistered. She whispered to her unborn child, I will find us a way, I swear it. The next morning, the sheriff found her and told her she had until sundown to be gone. We do not need trouble here, miss, he said, adjusting his badge. Best you move on. She nodded, lips pressed together. She had no money. No food. The train was long gone. Her only option was the dirt trail that led out of town, toward the hills. She walked. Each step sent pain up her legs. Her shoes were thin, her dress soaked with sweat. But she kept going. For the child. For herself. The trail led toward the timberline, where the land began to rise and the trees thickened. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows behind her. Then her vision blurred. Her knees buckled. She hit the ground hard. Hey there! The voice was rough, a deep rasp like gravel scraped across wood. She blinked up at a figure on horseback. The man dismounted quick, boots crunching dry twigs. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-dark skin and thick silver-streaked hair beneath a wide hat. A long scar ran along his jawline. He looked like he had seen war, or worse. He crouched beside her, frowning. You are burning up. Penelope tried to push herself up. I just need a place to rest. He looked at her belly, then met her eyes. You are with child. She nodded. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he scooped her up, arms strong and sure. She did not fight him. She was too tired. What is your name? He asked as he carried her toward his horse. Penelope Rawlins. I am Kade Zeller. You are coming with me. He lifted her onto the saddle, swung up behind her, and turned the horse toward the trees. They rode in silence, the rhythm of the horse steady beneath them. She leaned against him, weak but alert. His coat smelled of pine and smoke. He kept one arm around her, firm but not possessive. The woods opened into a small clearing, where a cabin stood, half hidden behind tall pines. Smoke curled from the chimney. A garden of onions and squash grew along the fence. It looked quiet. Safe. He carried her inside, laid her gently on a cot in the corner. You will rest here. I will bring water. She watched him move, deliberate, calm. His cabin was simple but clean. A rifle hung above the hearth. There were books on the shelf. A rocking chair by the fire. She exhaled slowly, letting the warmth settle around her. When he returned with water, she drank gratefully. I will not stay long, she said. I can work if you need help. You will stay until you are strong enough to walk again, Kade said. And after that, we will see. Penelope studied him. His face was unreadable, but something about it, some quiet steadiness, made her heart ease just a little. That night she dreamed of thunder, of men turning their backs, of hands reaching for her and letting go. But when she woke, there was firelight. And the smell of coffee. And the sound of Kade moving about the cabin. He fed her broth. Sat across from her in the rocker. Spoke little. The days passed. She helped in the garden when she could. Sewed a torn curtain. Mended socks. He never asked her to, but he always noticed. Nodded once in thanks. In town, she had been a burden. Here, she felt like a person again. One afternoon, she sat on the porch, rubbing her belly. The baby kicked. She smiled. Kade approached, wiping his hands on a rag. You look better. I feel better. He sat beside her, quiet. The wind rustled the trees. A deer passed through the clearing. I did not expect kindness out here, she said. You needed help. No one else thought so. He looked at her then, really looked. They were wrong. She felt a warmth rise in her chest. Why did you help me? Kade leaned back, eyes on the trees. My wife died 10 years ago. Fever took her. She was carrying our child. Penelope's breath caught. I could not save them, he said. But I saw you. And I could not walk away. She reached out slowly, her hand brushing his. He did not pull away. I am sorry, she whispered. He nodded once. Me too. And in that quiet space between grief and hope, something began to grow. Not pity. Not rescue. Something real. Something neither of them had expected. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills, Penelope found herself watching him with new eyes. And when he brought her a shawl as the night air cooled, she held it close like a promise. She was no longer just a burden. And maybe, just maybe, she was no longer alone. The creek behind the cabin ran clear and cold, cutting through the trees like a silver ribbon. Penelope stood barefoot at its edge, skirts pinned up, rinsing the last of Kade's shirts she'd found folded beside the hearth. Her fingers were swollen from the work, but not in a way that pained her, more in the honest ache of having done something needed. Kade had gone silent that morning, saddling his horse before sunrise. He left a half loaf of bread wrapped in cloth and a small bundle of dried apples on the table. No note, no explanation. Just that quiet gesture, as if saying he would come back without needing to promise it. The shirt dripped water between her fingers. She wrung it out and laid it across a flat stone warmed by the sun. The pine woods whispered with the wind, and a hawk wheeled overhead. She listened, not for danger, but for hoofbeats. By mid-afternoon he returned. Penelope saw the dust rise long before the shape of his horse broke through the trees. He looked tired, his coat dark with sweat at the shoulders. She waited on the porch, arms crossed over her belly, watching him dismount. He carried a sack tied at the top. It clinked faintly, as if jars knocked together inside. You went to town, she said. I needed salt and vinegar, he replied, setting the sack down by the door. And cornmeal. You ate the last of it. I could have gone with you. He took off his hat, ran his sleeve along his brow. It would not have been kind to take you back there. She hesitated, then nodded. They still talk? They always will. She sat down on the step, and he eased himself onto the split log beside her. His hands were rough with callus, and he rubbed his thumb along a small scar on his knuckle, absent-minded. I saw the preacher's wife in the dry goods store, he said without looking at her. She made a comment about women who take up in the hills with strangers. Penelope turned her head away. I told her I lost a mule last winter and replaced it with something smarter and more useful, he added, dry as dust. That startled a laugh out of her. You compared me to a mule? He glanced sideways. You're quieter than my mule ever was. She shook her head, but her shoulders relaxed. I'm not sure if that's a compliment. It is. They sat without speaking for a while. Bees buzzed around the late summer blossoms by the garden. A crow called somewhere higher up the ridge. The air smelled of crushed pine. Did you ever think about leaving? She asked finally. I did. Once. What changed your mind? He looked out over the clearing. Nothing left to run toward, Plenty here to keep alive. She looked at the garden, the fence mended in places with cedar branches, the smokehouse tucked beneath the rise. You built all this with your own hands? No one else was going to. Penelope tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I wouldn't know how to start. You already did. He stood then, hauled the sack inside with one hand. She followed him, watching as he unpacked jars of pickling spice, smoked pork wrapped in wax cloth, a sack of oats. I asked after a midwife, he said, placing a tin of lye soap in the wash basin. There's one in Green Hollow. She's older. Knows what she's doing. That's 4 days east. She said she'd ride west when the leaves turn. Penelope leaned against the table. You didn't have to do that. I didn't have to build a roof either, but I don't care to live wet. He turned to look at her then, his eyes steady. She felt something shift quiet deep. Not sudden. Just a settling, like a stone finding its place in the riverbed. I'll make supper, she said. He didn't stop her, only handed her the sack of dried beans. That evening, while the stew simmered and the light softened to gold, she mended one of his shirts with a patch from her old petticoat. He didn't comment, just pulled the rocking chair close to the fire and whittled a piece of cedar into a smooth shape. The baby kicked once, then settled. Penelope rested her hand over the movement, quiet. You think there's enough room here for 3? She asked without looking up. Kade's knife paused against the wood. There's room if you want there to be. She met his gaze then, and for the first time, she didn't feel like someone waiting to be turned away. Later, as the fire burned low and the night pressed against the windows, she slept deeply, knowing he was in the next room close, silent, steady. And in the darkness, something new took root. Not hope, not yet. But the shape of it. The first snow came early that year, fine and dry, settling on the roof in a hush. Penelope watched it fall from the cabin window, one hand resting low on her belly. The world beyond the glass turned pale and still, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Kade returned late from splitting wood, his coat dusted in white. He set the armful of kindling by the stove, then hung his gloves near the fire without a word. She noticed the way he rolled his shoulder, slower than usual. You're stiff, she said, pulling a chair close to the warmth. Sit down. I'll fix something for it. I'll be fine. You're not. He didn't argue again. When he settled into the chair, she fetched the tin of bear grease from the shelf and warmed it in her palms. He unbuttoned his shirt halfway and turned his back to her. The sight of the scar across his shoulder stopped her for a breath, a long, narrow line, healed but deep, like something done with purpose, not accident. She pressed her fingers to the muscle just below it, moving slowly. Who did this? She asked. Soldier. In Arkansas. Her hand stilled. War was over, he added. Didn't matter much. Some men keep killing after the flags go down. Penelope worked in silence for a while, the grease softening beneath her touch. His skin was warm, the muscle beneath it knotted thick from years of labor. She followed the line of the scar with her thumb, not asking anything more. You ever see him again? She asked after a while. No. Don't need to. She stepped back, wiping her hands. It's healing clean. He buttoned his shirt again, then stood and crossed to the fire. I saw a fox on the ridge, he said. Red one. Watching me. She eased into the chair he'd left. First thing I saw when I stepped off the wagon was a boy throwing stones at a dog. Kade looked over. That why you kept walking? I didn't have the strength to argue with boys. Outside, the wind kicked up, sending dry snow against the glass in soft bursts. Inside, the light from the fire stretched long against the floorboards. Do you believe people can change? She asked. He took his time answering. Not most of them. But some folks just need a place where no one's watching. Penelope studied him, his stillness, the way he held his weight in his heels. I don't know who I am anymore. You're someone who stayed standing when the ground gave way, he said. That's not nothing. She looked down at her hands. The skin was cracked along the knuckles. She didn't try to hide it. "That woman in town," she said. "The one who turned me away. I remember her apron was stained with blackberry jam. Don't waste memory on her." "I'm not. I just think it's strange what sticks." Kade moved to the window, watching the dark gather. "When the snow's deep enough, the elk come down. I'll take one if I can. That'll carry us." Penelope stood, stretching her back gently. "I can help cure the meat. You'll be near your time soon. I'm still useful. I can stir a pot. I can pack salt." He met her eyes then. "You don't know me for staying. I'm not paying a debt," she said. "I'm building something." That night she woke to the sound of him stoking the fire. Not loud, just the soft clink of iron, the hush of breath. She stayed quiet, eyes half-lidded, watching him move. He paused at the window, hands on the sill, looking out over the moonlit snow. The firelight caught the edge of his jaw, the silver in his hair. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. He stood like a man guarding something he thought long lost. In the morning, she found a small bundle of cedar branches tied with twine on the table. No note. Just the scent of clean wood and winter. She placed it in the cradle Kade had carved from pine, and sat beside it for a long time, her hand resting over the curve of her child, the room full of quiet and the promise of staying. By late November, the sun barely cleared the ridge before slipping behind the trees again, casting long blue shadows across the snow-packed clearing. The sky held that weightless hush that settles before birth or death. But inside the cabin, life pressed forward. Penelope stood by the hearth, slowly sewing the last of the flannel wraps Kade had traded for up in Green Hollow. Her feet ached, and the weight of the child shifted lower now, heavier than before. The days blurred into quiet tasks, rendering tallow, boiling herbs, stacking kindling along the wall, but the air inside felt fuller. Not just with the heat of the stove, but with something steadier, like the waiting had shape now. Kade came in with a bucket of snow to melt, boots crusted in ice. He shook off his hat and hung his coat by the door, his breath fogging in the warm air. "There's coyote tracks along the back fence," he said, voice low as ever. "Close enough I could count the toes." She didn't look up. "You think they'll test the pen? I patched a gap by the eastern post. But I'll keep watch tonight." He poured the snow into the pot on the stove, then leaned his hands on the table, not moving for a moment. "I dreamed about the prairie," he said. She paused mid-stitch. "You haven't mentioned dreams before. Don't usually remember them. This one stuck." "What happened?" "I was riding out toward the Platte. Sun was low, all that tall grass shining. Someone was riding ahead of me, just far enough I couldn't see their face. But I knew if I caught up, they'd turn around." Penelope set the needle aside. "Did you?" "I never got close. Horse started sinking in the mud. Then I woke up." She studied him, the way his fingers curled subtly against the table edge, like he was still holding reins made of air. "What do you think it means?" "Maybe nothing," he said. "But the feeling stayed with me." She crossed to the stove and lifted the pot lid, steam curling against her face. "You ever want to go back east?" he asked. "There's no one there waiting." "That's not what I asked." Penelope stirred the pot slowly, watching the broth swirl. "When I was small, I used to think the world ended at the edge of the map. That if I went too far west, I'd fall off into nothing. Now I think the only place I ever stood still is here." He nodded once, as if that answer settled something. They ate in silence, the table between them worn smooth in places where elbows had rested and hands had worked. After the meal, she folded the extra cloths into the cradle and sat down with a slow exhale. "You ready?" he asked, not quite facing her. "I don't think anyone ever is." He crouched, adjusting the kindling under the stove. "The midwife sent a bundle of leaves. Told me to boil them when the time comes. Said the smell alone helps some women breathe easier." "She send anything for pain?" "Only her hands when she gets here." Penelope smiled faintly, then winced as a tightness rippled through her middle. It passed quickly, but she saw him watching. His eyes didn't move, but his shoulders shifted forward, like he was preparing to stand. "I'm all right," she said. "If you weren't, what would you tell me?" "Probably the same thing." He sat back on his heels. "I've never delivered a child. I've never had one." They let the fire crackle between them for a while. Then he rose and fetched his coat again. "I'll walk the fence once more before dark." She watched him pause at the door, hand resting on the frame. "Kade?" He turned. "If I don't come through this, I want you to name the child." His jaw tightened. "You'll come through. I want you to name it anyway." He gave one small nod, then stepped out into the deepening blue of twilight. That night, the wind picked up. Penelope lay awake on the cot, one hand resting on her side, the other curled beneath her head. She could hear Kade moving outside, slow, deliberate steps crunching in the snow. He wasn't just guarding the fence. He was guarding the life they built in the corners of this quiet place, step by step, word by word. And somewhere in that stillness, she realized this wasn't waiting anymore. This was home. The labor began before first light, just as the snow deepened into drifts along the southern slope. Penelope felt the first pull deep in her belly, sharper than anything before, and knew without doubt that the time had come. She didn't cry out. She sat on the edge of the cot, gripping the wooden frame, and breathed through it. Kade was already stirring the stove, crouched low to coax the flame. When she rose and crossed the room with her hand braced on the wall, he stood without needing to ask. "I'll boil the water." She nodded, jaw tight. "The midwife's not here." "I know." They didn't speak again for a while. He brought the pot to the boil and laid the clean linen she'd prepared days ago along the hearth to warm. She clutched the edge of the table as another pain came and passed like a slow tide. Outside, the wind had calmed, the woods still beneath their quilt of snow. Kade kept his hands busy. He fetched the dried leaves the woman from Green Hollow had bundled and crushed them into the steaming water. Their scent filled the cabin, earthy and sharp. He tied his hair back with a strip of leather and rolled up his sleeves. "I've read the book she sent," he said. "Twice." Penelope gave a short breath that might have been laughter. "Then read it again in your head and stay close." He did. The hours passed in quiet agony. The pain came like waves, each one stronger than the last, but she bore down through it, bracing her forearm against the wall, her forehead damp. Kade moved only when needed, offering a damp cloth, steadying her when her knees buckled, muttering calm, low-voiced phrases she barely heard but somehow needed. By late afternoon, her strength began to fray. She sank to her knees on the braided rug, breath ragged, eyes glazed. "I can't," she whispered. "You can't," he said, crouched beside her. "You are." The next contraction brought a cry from her throat, raw and torn. Kade didn't flinch. He helped her to the cot, propped her with pillows, and pressed a warm cloth to her brow. It wasn't until the shadows stretched long across the floorboards that the final push came, and with it, a cry not hers, a high, furious bleat that filled every quiet corner of the room. Penelope let out a shuddering exhale and fell back against the pillow, tears running unchecked down her cheeks. Kade held the child in his large, careful hands, his eyes wide with something close to awe. He wrapped the infant in flannel and pressed it into her arms. "A girl," he said softly. Penelope looked down at the tiny face, flushed and squalling, her fists clenched tight against the cold. "She's perfect," she whispered. Kade sat beside her, the cot creaking under his weight. "You did that." "We did," she said. Then, after a moment, "Did you choose a name?" "I did." She waited. "Clara. It was my mother's name. She died young. Never saw the mountains. But she would have liked you." Penelope looked down at the child. "Then Clara she is." Night fell gently over the ridge. The storm held off. The fire burned low and steady. Days passed. The child learned her mother's scent and her father's voice. Kade built a cradle that rocked smooth and quiet. Penelope rested when she could, fed Clara by the light of the fire, and began to feel her body return to her. One morning, as frost rimmed the cabin windows in lace, Penelope stepped onto the porch wrapped in a wool shawl, Clara swaddled against her chest. Kade was stacking the last of the winter wood. "She has your nose," he said without turning. "She has your ears." He turned then met her eyes. "I never expected this," she said. "Not the child. Not you. I didn't expect to have anything left worth keeping." Clara stirred, let out a soft sound, then settled again. "I don't want to leave this place," Penelope said. "Not ever. You won't have to." They stood together in the early light, the frost crackling underfoot. The trees were bare, the sky pale blue. The only sound was the small, steady breathing of the child between them. Kade took her hand rough to the palm, warm, and held it without needing to explain anything. She leaned into him, and he into her, until their weight balanced just so. Spring came slow, but it came. Penelope planted early squash and onion again, her hands firm in the soil. Kade taught her how to notch fence posts and lift them straight. Clara grew strong, her cry loud and certain, her eyes dark as her father's. When the geese returned overhead, they built a second room onto the cabin, one wall at a time. Penelope learned the weight of a hammer, the swing of an axe. Kade learned the shape of her laughter, the rhythm of her lullabies. In early June, they stood beneath the cottonwoods at the edge of the clearing, no preacher, no paper, just hands joined and vows spoken plain. "I will choose you every day," Penelope said, "even when the world is quiet. And I will build with you," Kade answered, "until my hands can't hold the tools." They kissed, not with urgency, but with the deep stillness of people who had waited long enough. That night, after Clara slept, they sat by the fire, fingers twined, the scent of summer wood smoke in the air. They were not what the world had asked for, an abandoned woman and a widower scarred by war, but they had become something the world could not deny. A family. And in the hush between the wood creaking and the fire popping, they knew they had made it. Not just through winter or labor or grief, but into love. The kind that does not fade. Forever, as promised.